It's Thursday, March 21st, 2019. This is the Hermetic Hour. I'm your host, Poke Runyon, and tonight we present a discussion on the various traditions of the underworld from the mythologies, religions, and folklore of cultures around the world with our guest, very honored Frater Solomon, Michael Johnson. Frater Solomon is a biblical scholar with a background in social science, and Mike has compiled maps of the underworld, which locate the hells of the major religions. And your host, Frater Tapion, that's myself, will join in with references to Kenneth Grant's Tunnels of Set, Shaver's Darrow Caverns, the underground kingdom of Agartha, and the shamanic under- and overworlds, and the proto-psychological Kabbalistic metaphor of the Nepesh, the Nekima, and the Ruach. So, if you want to take the e-ticket ride through the great funhouse below the horizon, tune in with us, and we'll go below. Stand by, Mike, until I get done with the introduction here. We have a hell of a show for you tonight. Actually, we'll have several dozen hells for you because we intend to explore multicultural underworlds with all the philosophical and cultural diversity we can apply to this subject. But before we welcome our guest, very honored Frater Solomon, let us define our terms and establish the parameters of our discussion. First, we must remind our listeners that we are hermetic, and this means that we follow below, which in this case means man, that's us, boys and girls too. Man is a microcosm of the greater universal macrocosm, which means that you have the sun and all the planets inside you. And it also means, as Omar said, you yourself are heaven and hell, heaven but the vision of fulfilled desire, and hell but the shadow of a soul on fire. And the Kabbalah is psychologically divided into three realms: the Nepesh, the subconscious, the Ruach, the reasoning consciousness, and the Nekema, the higher spiritual or cosmic consciousness. Now, this three-level structure becomes the metaphoric model or formula for myths, legends, religions, and philosophies, and Freud and Jung's psychology, wherever human society develops. Heaven and hell are really day and night because the heavenly bodies, the moon and the constellations, all disappear at sunrise and reappear after sunset. The underworld is actually the overworld, and so it was in ancient times until Heracles dragged Cerberus, the guard dog of Hades, out of the cavern. But shamans, Kabbalists, and magicians still reach heavenly mystical realms by first going down into the darkness of the underworld in order to climb a ladder to the stars. The Western esoteric concepts of heaven and hell are a combination of biblical, Old and New Testament, and classical Greco-Roman mythology. There are several similarities and syntheses between these two themes. And in the oldest versions of both, the underworld of the dead was a dark and dismal place, Sheol for the Hebrews and Hades for the Greeks. In those days, heaven was only for the blessed, or, in the Nordic version, for the heroes. Through the Gnostics, Christian and Hermetic, the ancient Egyptian ideas of a Redeemer and a paradise to come created new maps of heaven and hell. I suspect that this ancient Egyptian legacy even spread eastward. Conversely, the ancient Egyptians themselves may have been influenced by the Central Asian pole star cult. We know that Scythian shamans influenced the Akkadians of Mesopotamia and the Orphics of ancient Greece, and perhaps the ancient Egyptians before them. Thus, the notion that the Milky Way is the river of souls, which moved Plato to say that every man is a star. All this, you thought Crowley said that, but Plato said it actually. All this gets very complicated, but it boils down to this. There is a connection between humans and the greater universe they live in and die in. This is especially important if we believe, as so many of us do, that our minds are our software and our brains are the hardware. When we die, we can upload our minds to the cloud. Keeping this in mind, pun intended, we can understand various attempts to create micro-macro schematics, such as the Kabbalistic tree of life and the more naturally oriented Nordic Yggdrasil. And we can enjoy Dante's Divine Comedy and the various heavens and hells of the Buddhists and the Muslims. We can understand and enjoy such modern developments as the subterranean kingdom of Agartha, the tunnels of Set, under the Tree of Life, the Darrow Caverns of Richard Shaver, the Space Brothers of the Ashtar Command, and the Lemurians of Mount Shasta. But it helps to have a guidebook and an atlas, and that is what very honored Frater Solomon has been working on. So let us welcome Michael Johnson and let him tell us about his project. Okay, Mike, take it from the top or take it from the bottom, either one. Go ahead.
All right. Yeah. Well, this has been a lot of fun. It's well over 20 years of research that I finally decided to put in a book. The way I'm doing it, because this is it has a reality to it. It's not just recounting this. I want to actually use our Rosicrucian yoga system to go into these realms, because the way all of these people that have experienced these realms before we have hasn't been on some academic level. It has required getting into a trance state. One of the things that's really fascinating about these underworlds and overworlds is how parallel they run to each other in a way that almost makes me think either the system of several heavens and several hells was developed in prehistoric times, or there is some psychological need to layer our universe with layers above us and layers below us. But the interesting thing, when we talk about heaven and hell being partners in our universe, one thing that's really popular is the overworld and the underworld correspond to each other. So, for instance, in Hindu legend, at the furthest horizon, you would have the moon rising and setting, but they would rise and set into a corresponding heaven, but then they would go on the underworld and they would go into a corresponding hell that was equally as distant. So when it's day in hell, it's night here, and when it's night in the underworlds, it's day here. We see this as far back as early Egyptian mythology. Where did the sun go at night? Well, it went to light the underworld, and then it came back up and it lit our world. And the system that's most common, it's usually 7 and 7, 7 overworlds and 7 underworlds. That's popular in Hebrew tradition. There's 7 underworlds, but this world is the top underworld, and then there are 7 heavens above us. In Hindu lore, it switches that a little bit, where this is the lowest heaven, and then there's 6 above us, but then there's 7 hells below us. What's interesting, though, is how well these systems also overlap with each other. And this is as far around the globe as you have the Aztecs and the Pueblo Indians. They have their underworlds. You have the Maori and the Polynesians in general. They have an overworld and underworld system that likewise matches itself. And even as far-flung as the Maori, they have a river of souls, which is the Milky Way. So this is a very, very ancient concept that is basically to our soul. And if we're to extrapolate that and project, who knows? Maybe we're incarnating throughout the Milky Way, so that's why we call it the River of Souls, where we're just bouncing all around, and then we come to Earth. And that's from a magical perspective, that's fun to think. From a rational perspective, well, the universe just isn't as fun. But one thing that was also interesting is when the ancients were contemplating these heavens and hells, and this is why we have to put them in another dimension. Sure, the heavens, we can go up several light years, but in the hells, the Earth's only so deep. But the problem is they were describing the hells at a distance where if you take the Buddhist hells and the Jain hells of India, these hells are they're deeper than the other end of the Earth. So that's how deep you're going. Well, how are you going to access that? Well, you're going to have to go through some sort of portal or dimension in order to get there. It can't be something that's on the material plane.
Let me interrupt you to mention something here. When you say that, one of the things that becomes more and more and more obvious as you study this whole thing is that these other worlds, both the overworlds and underworlds, Kabbalah and magic and shamanism and all of the religions, they are actually other dimensions. They're not physically down there, down underground, and they're not physically, they're not out there in outer space either. Everything, as one person pointed out, the whole solar system and even the next solar systems and again the whole galaxy and then even the galaxies beyond are all in our physical dimension, and yet they are also in another physical dimension, and this becomes more and more obvious the more we get into this. And I like to use the old hippie joke, about the two hippies standing down on the Santa Monica Pier. And they're looking out. At the Pacific, and the one of them says, "Man, that's a lot of water out there." And the other one looks at him and he says, "Yeah, man, that's only the top." Yeah, that's the best way to put it. And I think I finally found Shaver's major source for his simultane. I think I have. I think it comes from Henry Bergson, a French philosopher at the late Victorian era. And interestingly enough, Henry Bergson's daughter married Sam Mathers of the Golden Dawn, and the two of them together, Sam and Moyna, developed the Enochian system. But Henry Bergson, her father, wrote this book called The Creative Mind, which was first put into English in 1946. And I think Shaver probably cut his teeth on it in 1946 because in 1949 he published his concept on the simultane. And what Bergson said was that these other dimensions can be likened to radio stations, and they're all broadcasting. They're all broadcasting different programs at the same time, but they're broadcasting them on different frequencies. And so I think Shaver read that, and I think he got his simultaneous idea that in Wells' Time Machine. Anyway, yeah, let's keep in mind as we go through this that these underworlds and overworlds, these heavens and hells, are other dimensions. They are so go ahead. I go ahead.
Yeah, it's the only way to experience them and to have them work, because if you don't do that, especially with the underworlds and the world being round, each underworld gets smaller and smaller and smaller. But the problem with that is the underworlds in just about all the traditions were made to match the overworlds, the corresponding overworlds. So your first hell is small, and it's the same size as your first heaven. So that would be the moons going over the world and under the world, and it has to have the same dimensions. But the problem is the further out you go, like let's say when you go to the sun or you go all the way out to Saturn, then the corresponding hell beneath has to be that much deeper in order to match the heaven above. And that's important because the way the Hindus and the Buddhists and the Jains of India viewed the universe was as a set of islands that were concentric. So here we are on our central island called Jambu, which is basically the known world. Then outside that, there's a round ocean because the Indians, they view the world as round. And when I'm saying round, I mean like a circle. The land was a circle. Around that's a circular sea. Around that's another circular land, and then another circular sea. And what all the planets would do is they would go through these seas to light the underworld, and then at the next day they would be lighting this world, or at night they'd be lighting this. They would be in this world. So they would switch positions where one was lighting the other. And one thing that's interesting is these underworlds. We think of them that most of us come from a Christian upbringing, and there's heaven above, and there's hell below, and they're very distinct. They're very much opposites, and there's no union between the two. However, when the ancients were going out and they were going up, there was a corresponding downside. So if you went above, you were also going below. This Milky Way, the ancients looked up, and they knew that it went around the whole planet because they could perceive the stars. So, not realizing the world was round, that meant the Milky Way had to go into the underside of the planet, but it would actually, they would have considered it the underworld. So, just to cover a couple of traditions to give you an idea of the beauty of these other realms. In India, the thing that was really common was to view all these as beautifully jeweled realms that were lit by gems because there was no sun to light them. Because all these realms were separate. There was only one of these realms that had the sun running through it. The rest of them just had a planet running through it. But the first realm, and this is kind of interesting, is it's called Atala. And in that region, there is a great magician named King Maya. And he rules this beautiful realm, and it's a realm where if you're there, men are going to like this more than women, but you just have tons of women who are pleasing every single one of your sexual whims. The next level down is Vaitala, which is a realm where a very precious form of gold is made. And this is kind of odd. This is where Shiva is in charge. His name there is Hara Baba is his name as his incarnation in this world called Vaitala. And in here there's a river. Vital kind of goes with it. There's a river of semen, and it's called the Hataki River. And there's a substance associated from it. The fire god Agni, when he drinks from this river, he vomits a very precious gold called Hataka. And so it's a realm where everyone has all the gold that they could ever need of or dream. So again, it's a very jeweled, bespecked realm. Next realm down is Sutala. It's where King Bali rules. And the legend of King Bali is millions of years ago. This little dwarf comes to King Bali, who's taken over the heavens, and he's taken over the earth, and he's obviously in charge of the hells. And this little dwarf says, let me take 2 steps and let that be my kingdom. And so King Bali says, hey, you're just a little dwarf, that's fine. And then Vamana, he turns into a full-size Vishnu. One step he covers the heaven. The next step he covers the earth. He can't take a third step because there's only two. So he says, all right, Bali, you get the underworld, which is it's described as a very beautiful, jewel-decked place. And then you keep going down. The next one is the demon magician Maya, and you have all these levels of these powerful serpent-like entities called Nagas. The Hebrews, where they got their system, and I think a lot of people miss this because I've had a devil of a time, no pun intended, trying to dig up the names. But there's the 7 gates of hell, and that comes from Babylon. And there's the 7 Hebrew underworlds. So where did these 7 Hebrew underworlds came from? Well, they obviously originally came from Babylon, even though we don't have the names of those realms anymore. At least my research wasn't able to find them. And these realms are all described as mostly quite beautiful, very rich, lush lands underneath ours. The realm underneath ours, it's called Tebel, and it's filled with serpent-headed and lion-headed and bull-headed people, as well as people who are animals with human heads. You go a level below that, it's called Zaya, and that's a land of extreme wealth where very beautiful people live. Then below that is a world called Nishaya, which means forgetting, and that matches the Greek river of Lethe, where people, they drink from it and they forget. So nobody in Nishaya has any memory because they drink of this sea of forgetfulness. And then the 4th world down, or
but
no, the 5th world down.
Wait. But before you leave that, let's make sure that everybody listening understands that also corresponds to the river Lethe in Orphic mythology. And the river Lethe is the river of forgetfulness, and So this is one of the. So many times we find that we find in biblical and in classical mythology we find the same motifs, like Noah's Ark, in biblical mythology, Noah's Ark lands on Mount Ararat, and in Greek mythology, it lands on Mount Parnassus. We find these stories that back and forth. Oh, go ahead. I just want to make that. Just want to make that insertion there, so we've sort of underlined that. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that both something that was obviously Phoenician in origin, the underworld of Zaya, matches the Greek river of Lethe, which is the river of forgetfulness. You go further, and there's only one world in Hebrew lore that's really a world that you don't want to get yourself caught into. At least 6 of the 7 layers. It's called Arca. It's the 5th underworld down, and the top level is Sheol, which is where the general dead go. The level below that is Abaddon, then there's Saith HaYawan, then there's Bir Shahat, and there's Sha'ar Zalmot, which means the shadow of death, and then there's Sha'armot, which means death. The valley of the shadow of death, and then the valley of death. And then below that is the fiery world of Gehenna, where the worst people end up. But then below that is a nice world called Adama, which is just another Hebrew word for earth, which is a pleasant place of brooks and streams. And then below that is Eretz, and since there's no light there, nobody can see anything in Hebrew tradition. But for the most part, all these realms that have Babylonian origin, they're actually nice places to go. Unless you've been a bad person stuck into one of these little hells, you have plenty of beautiful places that you can go on your afterlife journey. And that matches what the Hindus have. They have a bunch of beautiful realms, and it's only when you get to the realm called Naraka where the really bad people go, which is it's not 7 levels down, it's 8 levels down. And then the Buddhists and the Jains have different subdivisions. But those realms, I calculate them, they're so deep, like I said, it would be beyond the depth of the Earth or even the other side of the Earth. And you're getting in the Jane's world. It's pretty neat. It was so big, I calculated it out. It's over a septillion light years wide. That's over trillions of times larger than our own universe. So the neat thing about these ancients is they really had a way of making the world very, very big. And the higher up you could go, you go up to the highest heaven in Jainism, in Buddhism, and the heavens, they get bigger. And the top heaven can view into the lowest hell, and the lowest heaven can only view into the lowest hell. So there's this whole connection, kind of like Emanuel Swedenborg said, where the deepest hell sits right next to the highest heaven. They're right on top of each other. One's right beneath the other.
This is why one of the metaphoric reasons why if you really want to climb the ladder to the stars, you need to go down in the cave and then you go down in the cave and then come up. And come up from the cave and climb to the stars, and this is shamanism. This is what they do. They go up. They go to the underground in order to go to the heavens, and this is basically the same thing that we have in the Kabbalah with the Nefesh and the Ruach and the Nekemah. And you bypass the Ruach, you go down into the Nefesh, that's just the subconscious, and bypass the Ruach, the rational mind, and climb to the Nekemah, the cosmic consciousness. We go down, and that of course is mythologically this goes back to Hercules pulling the dog out of the hole. When he pulled the dog out of the hole, which was probably about 600 BC. That's about when Hercules pulled Cerberus out of the cavern, and that's about when these concepts mythologically separated in the classical tradition and also in the Hermetic tradition, in the biblical and in the Greek in the Greek traditions. Okay, that was just my answer. Go ahead.
Well, no, that's an interesting point, because I kind of thought you would be saying the opposite of that, which is heaven and hell were separated, were united, whereas my view, and I think you're actually agreeing with it, and tell me if I'm wrong, heaven and hell were considered one until 600 BC. Does that sound more accurate?
Yeah. There's hardly, as I say, up till 600 BC, you had the underworld and many of the features of the overworld were still in the underworld. Not so much in ancient Egypt, but in other areas of the world, where for instance, you have in the Akkadian tradition, you have the idea of the Maskim, the planetary demons. Born in the bowels of the hills, evil ones, sowers of ills, no wives have they known, no children begot. The beings, they are seven disturbers of heaven. And what this meant was that the planets rose up, out of the bowels of the hills. So you look out to the horizon and in the hills after sunset, and you see the planets starting to rise out of the hills. And they feared them. This is where this whole idea, the malefics, the planets, because the planets are retrograde. The zodiac revolves one way, and the planets revolve the opposite way. And this is where they got the idea of the disturbers of heaven, born in the bowels of the hills, evil ones, sowers of ills. And this was the idea that the overworld was the underworld, during the day, so does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. So I guess you and I are thinking more alike on that than I had thought. One thing that is interesting when you think about a cave, and you think about the images that caverns inspire, there's two. And it's interesting because they go in the opposite direction, and there's legends that match both. There's obviously a lot of volcanic regions where mines were dug, where people were going into the bowels of the earth, and what was happening when they were going in? Well, it was getting hotter. They were getting closer to molten areas in order to extrapolate all this and get their gems and their gold and their silver and their iron, and it matches with the fiery hell that is more popular. However, there's plenty of caves where when you go into them, it gets colder. So with these two different types of caves that you can go in, and there's even an interesting city. One thing that's really interesting is in ancient times, there were all sorts of entrances into the underworld. You had all of these caves that rivers came out of all over Greece, and they were gateways into the underworld of Hades. So Hades wasn't some far-off land that your spirit would float to. It was immediately below Greece. True across the globe. But what was interesting is the Chinese have a tradition of 7 hot hells and 7 cold hells. And I think what inspired this is there's plenty of caves where you go into when they're cold. And you're thinking, well, where does this cold come from? Well, it comes from the cold hells. But when you're going into a cave that's hot, where does that heat come from? Well, that comes from the hot hells. So it's kind of interesting how they came up with 2 different sets of hells, and they're fun to read about, but they're also places you don't want to visit because if you're reborn there, the nearest one, you have to live for tens of thousands of years, either getting chopped up and frozen or chopped up and burned, just depending if you go to one of the hot hells or cold hells. And then 7 layers deeper, well, your life is 20 times longer than these tens of thousands of years. Then the next level down, even 20 times more. So to match the intensity of all these hells, the nice thing is at least there's a corresponding heaven where things get 20 times better and 20 times better and 20 times better. One thing that also stood out to me when I was studying all of these is the overlap. One of the things that really, really shocked me in particular is the overlap between Aztec and Nordic mythology and their afterlife, because their afterlives, these are people who are, they're separated by a huge ocean, but for some reason in their meditations, they were both warring cultures, but they had a lot of similarities. They had 3 principal afterlives that you could go through that correspond with each other. There's the hell of the general people, and the Nords called that Helheim, which is kind of a gloomy world. The Aztecs called that Mictlan. They also had an interesting paradise that you could go to if you died by anything related to water, and this is both the Nords and the Aztecs. If you drowned or you died from some water-related disease, dysentery, then you would go to what the Aztecs called Tlalocan, which is the watery paradise, and the Nords called Noetun, which is also the watery paradise. And then they each had their own version of Valhalla. The Nords, if you were a warrior, you died in battle, you'd go to Valhalla. If you were an Aztec and you died in war, you'd go to the heaven of Huitzilopochtli. So that was an interesting overlap. Another interesting overlap is the Tibetan underworlds and the Navajo and Hopi underworlds, because they match each other. And these are before you get to any of the hells. You have your The Tibetans have first you have layers of black and white clay, then red clay, then yellow clay, then blue clay, and then finally black clay. And that matches the Pueblo, Navajo and Hopi worlds, where they have underneath this world there was a red world in some traditions, or a black and white world. Underneath that is a yellow world, and then a blue world, and then a black or black and yellow world. And that's according to their tradition. Where did all humans come from? Well, they actually came from these underworlds, and they ascended to get to our current level, which is interesting because it goes totally against the grain of what most of us think of. But it also matched the Hebrew lore, where the flood actually happened to a couple of Earths below ours, and it was only the middle of these Earths, the fourth one, where the immediate descendants of Noah are still living. And then the rest of us, we just kept coming up until we got to the seventh world that we're at now. So anyways, do you have any thoughts on everything that I've mentioned just now?
Well, I have to admit that when you started talking about the yellow hills and the red hills, I got to thinking about the little dakinis that we used to visualize in Vajrayogini, and we had little dakinis. Little, voluptuous 16-year-old girls, the Tibetans, the Dalai Lama told us that when we took the Kava Chakra, he told us we were now entitled to have 16-year-old dakinis, and of course I'm sitting there thinking, not in California, but anyway, we had in Vajrayogini we had a kind of a hexagram pedestal. And then what we would do is we would run all these voluptuous little elementally colored colored like the four elements, and we'd run them around counterclockwise like a carousel, and they were all bouncing and running around, and we run them around counterclockwise, and this way we would actually go live longer. This was like the old Phoenician idea that every day you spend at sea, you don't age, because if you keep running the little bikinis around counterclockwise and you go back in time, or at least you're resetting your biological clock with these little gals. I was thinking about that, so that was running through my mind when you started talking about that. But what I would like to ask you at this point. Let's talk about some of the more modern underworlds, mystical underworlds, and some of the more, like Agartha and Shaver, and also we mentioned to get it into a hermetic category. We mentioned the tunnels of Set from Kenneth Grant's Night Side of Eden. And by the way, the Night Side of Eden, if you want to buy it right now, it's I think it's about the cheapest copy I could find was $115. But Night Side of Eden by Kenneth Grant has the second part of it has the tunnels of Set, and the tunnels of Set underlie the paths of the Tree of Life, and this is a schematic. Actually, it's a creative schematic, because the Tree of Life is a schematic, and it's not a pictorial map. Although I did make a pictorial map out of it for Adams's Quest, but it's not a pictorial map. It's a schematic, and so the tunnels of Set underlie the paths on the Tree of Life. And each one of them is ruled by a qliphothic demon, some of which I think Grant scried, and some he got from mythology. And the qliphoth, which is something I don't agree with, but this is something from Orthodox Jewish Kabbalah. It's a kind of a hell. but it's more of a country of demons, and they all do something terrible, like the deceivers and the destroyers and whatever. Do you have a copy of Night Side of Eden, or because I got one sitting
somewhere. I can't find it, and I'm going to probably have to get another copy. I know I like it.
It's going to cost you. Like I say, the cheapest I can find is $115. But I've got, as I say, I've got one right here. However, you can get it. You can get the second part of it, which has part 2, which has the whole outline for the tunnels have set. You can get that on Kindle, or I think it's.
Oh.
I don't. Yeah. I think you can, but it may be out of Kindle print, but I think at least it's the second part, and that of course has become. It's just like Lovecraft's Necronomicon. Those tunnels of Set. They're a creation. Kenneth Grant created them, but like Lovecraft's Cthulhu mythos, they've gotten into our tradition, and so they're even covered in Godwin's Kabbalistic Encyclopedia. Do you want to see it? Do you want to say anything about Sheol and the Cliff Off?
Yeah. Sheol. The interesting thing is when the Hebrews built out their tradition, Sheol was the top level because it was a comparatively amicable place. It's where everybody went. But then when it was expanded into 7 hells, then it became more like the traditional hell that we're used to, and it kind of matched. It's actually what inspired Dante's Inferno, which is a pretty good description of the way they thought hell was. Of course, it has his own creative insertions in it. But all of these, the worse sin you did, the deeper hell with more fire that you went to, until, this is kind of odd, when you went to the very lowest of the hells, even though it should have been a lake of fire, had Dante followed biblical symbolism, he made it a lake of super cold ice. So you've got Cain and Judas Iscariot and Ptolemy and Antenor, and they're all in these horribly frozen environments where they can hardly move at all. Beyond that, I can't say I've read the Night Side of Eden in such a long time that I remember much about it. But I do like the whole Cliffotic and Goetic lore. I just don't emphasize it so much because I like Angels a whole lot more.
I agree with you, and I don't like the Qliphoth because the Qliphoth is a Kabbalistic concept that's based upon the idea that as the sphere as Ta'ath fell, all the shells of the various spheres of the Tree of Life, and then the fall, they broke away and fell, and all the shells fell down. So the Qliphoth is full of shells. And the fall of resulting from the fall of man, and this is part of this idea that Adam Kadmon is the Kabbalah and is man and is the universe. It's part of this Hermetic idea that, and this is why we say Tu es Deus, you are God, and that is, and I want to make sure, even though we say that. That doesn't mean we don't revere God, and it doesn't mean we don't revere God beyond ourselves. This is a mistake that people that criticize the Hermetic tradition and Kabbalah, they think that we think we're God, but that is not what we mean. What we mean is we're part of God, and we're part of God,
right.
but the totality. the totality of God is so vast that it's overwhelming, and so they unfortunately this. The whole idea of the great I am and all is not something that means that we're selfish, and it doesn't mean that we're sociopathic. What it means is that we know we have God within us, and we know we are the children of God, and let me mention. To get into the more modern versions of what what you're doing, and I know that you will appreciate this. I'm looking at on my knee right now is Subterranean Worlds. 100,000 years of dragons, dwarves, the dead, lost races, and UFOs from inside the earth by Walter Crafton Minkell. Now this is a nice fat paperback, and it's essential on this kind of subject. And right now, the used copies. I know that you got a copy and I got a copy, but right now, used copies of this book are going for about 100. I think about 100 and about $75 a copy. I think you can get a good used copy of it. Anybody that's interested in modern versions of these underworlds, modern versions, all the way from Agartha in the Victorian age. That's the underground city of the Tibetan in Tibet, all the way through Shaver and the Hollow Earth and all of these various underworld, the modern underworlds. You need to get a copy of this book. This is essential. You want to talk about
Agartha brings up. Yeah, I definitely do, because studying the first level. Yeah, I've got your Agartha book, and I know we've talked about a bunch of different sources, but one thing that just smacked in my face is something that should have been totally obvious, is the first level of Patala, this grand jewel-bedecked world where they have a magician king named Bala. Well, which is the description of Agartha very well. Agartha and Atala, I think, are the same location. They even have similar sounds.
Well, that's Hindu, isn't it?
Yeah, and so that would match. It was something that the Buddhists adopted.
Well, that's what
they pretty much accepted all of these Hindu underworlds.
Well, that's what Jocelyn Godwin said in that foreword, that this you can trace this back to Brahman mythology.
Right.
This would
that
Agartha,
makes sense.
Yeah, it was originally Agartha. Originally was the holy city of the Brahmins. That's what it was originally, and then it got picked up. I don't think the Buddhists ever, I really don't. I don't think the Buddhists ever really got it. I think, Asandowski said he got it from the High Lama in Urga back in 1920. Well, no, I don't think he got it. I don't think he got it from Urga at all. I think he got it from Roman Sternberg, and I think Roman Sternberg probably read, because he was into that sort of thing. He thought he was the reincarnation of Genghis Khan, and he probably read St. Eve's book Agartha. I don't know whether there was a Russian translation, but I don't know whether Roman read French or not. But I'll bet you he picked up the Agartha story from Eve's book in 1910. And then he told that to Asandowski, and Asandowski goes and claims that he got it from the High Lama. The High Lama, of course, was an alcoholic and a child molester and a really scumbag. But I think it came from Roman Sternberg, but originally came from Eve's, because Asandowski's version of it is almost identical with Eve's. What is it? St. Eve's, Alexander St. Eves, you got it right there. What's his last name?
Let's see. Marquis Alexandre St. Yves d'Alvedre.
Yeah. By the way,
right?
that book is. That's right. That book's still available. They're Intertraditions, probably the Kingdom of Agartha, and it's available for about $14, and it's beautiful. It's a beautiful book. He went there on the astral, and this is an underworld, underground city. Of course, and as I say, it derives originally from Brahmin mythology, and of course, and as I say, it got picked up by the Mad Baron and Asendowski and Shaver picked it up from them, or Palmer did, yeah, and of course Keel and whatever. We've discussed this before, and it's. So Agartha is really, really fascinating. Before we get to the end of this discussion, I would like to mention another book, which, by the way, I'm gonna loan to you, Michael. I'm gonna loan you this book, and you will just love it. It's called Cave and Cosmos by Michael Harner, Shamanic Encounters with Another Reality. And it's got a cover showing a stairway leading up out of a cave into a celestial scene. And this is Central Asian shamanism, where so much of all of this got started. And he has in here he has maps of the shamanic maps of the underworld, the middle world, and the overworld, and they are very, very much like your maps that I'm looking at. And this book, we've actually done a show on this book, and I'm sure you can go through the archives, find the abstract. I can't remember the exact date when we did the show. It's called Cave and Cosmos, Shamanic Encounters with Another Reality by Michael Harner. And this is really, really one that we really in this particular subject we need to look at. Okay, now are you going to go ahead and develop this thing into a book? I hope.
Yes, I am. I've already started the meditation exercises to allow me to visit all these worlds, contemplate them, and I think it'll be a lot more exciting than just a simple read the description atlas. I'm going to take you on a journey, starting at the highest hell, and then going to the lowest underworld, and then when I'm in the lowest underworld, I'll pop back out to go to the spheres of the moon on up to take you through all the corresponding celestial realms that correspond with all the underworlds. And that way you're going to get a very full experience of all these traditions from around the world and seeing their overlap with each other, because a lot of these traditions overlap. You have these dwarves in the underworld that match the Hebrew tradition all the way up in Germany and Norway. And it's just really, it's fascinating and it's beautiful. That's something that I can't stress enough. All of these underworlds, even though they're more material and they're more opulent and they're more focused on all the glories of materialism, they're still very beautiful places to contemplate where even if you do end up in one of the underworlds, hey, it actually isn't going to be that bad.
Yeah, and of course they are, as we have said, they are extra dimensional, and so they can be visited using Rosicrucian yoga, and they can. I'm sure there are people that they can use other methods to visit them, but I don't want to mention that. We'll hold out now. We'll hold out for Rosicrucian yoga, and
right.
Anyway, yeah, and anyway, this has been a fascinating evening, and I'm sure that our listeners will be looking forward to you publishing this. I'm looking at some of your graphics, your beautiful graphics that you've been working on and on this subject. And I want to thank you so much for coming on board and sharing all this with us. And we will look forward to seeing more of it. And so take care, and I will see you. I'll see you next week. And I'll see you at I'll see you this. I'll see you this weekend. It's seasonal. So anyway. Take care, be well, good magic, and to everybody listening, seasonal is Saturday night, and for those of you who are listening, you're going to be there, and you're going to have the spring marriage, and this is going to be the 45th consecutive seasonal that we did, the Canaanite sacred marriage that we've done. So. Until then, good magic, and next week we'll be back with another Hermetic Hour. Okay, bye-bye.